All right, terrific. Welcome, everyone. We're so pleased that you could join us today for a new view of gatherings. I'm Melpa Many-Merdekis. I'm a Vice President at Ruotolo Associates, and I'm joined by Don Handworker, Senior Associate with the firm. We're pleased that you're here for just another one of our Lunch and Learn series, which is in response to your survey answers to us, which really gave us an insider's view on what's keeping you up at night. So before we get started, as others are joining us, I'm going to ask Dawn to just introduce herself a little bit. I'll do the same, and then we'll dive right in.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming today to talk about the new world of events with us. And my background is I started in the corporate world. I then moved on to some entrepreneurial work where I had a retail store and invitations, did a lot of work with events, weddings, and then subsequently moved into the nonprofit world where I worked at a high school. I worked at a private high school in Connecticut here. And then I worked for a museum here in Connecticut, doing events at both places, working in development, fundraising, and events, capital campaigns, that kind of thing. And that was all prior to coming to Ruotolo. Now we're working with clients and helping them understand a lot of different things that are happening in our world now as things change. And today we're going to focus on how events are changing and growing and evolving in the last few months for sure. And I'm from Connecticut. So
terrific. Thank you, Dawn. So I'm joining you while Dawn is in Connecticut. Firm is headquartered in New Jersey. I'm joining you from Minneapolis. So we, again, have been in business over 41 years, serving nonprofits across the country. And it's interesting, we're a full service consulting firm really focusing on mission advancement for nonprofits of all size in areas everywhere from faith-based to education, to arts and culture, to social service. And so from that standpoint, while we're focused on events today, we are taking a little bit of a holistic approach to this because we see it as one of many components that are in your toolkit or are part of your portfolio of offerings to engage constituents and raise funds and raise awareness. So while there are a lot of partners out there that focus specifically on events, and we'll talk about how to engage those, know that our approach is a bit more holistic in how we're looking at this. So you can see how events fit into kind of, again, the portfolio of what you're offering. So out of those 41 years, my association with Ruotolo Associates dates back 29. I've been with the firm on and off over the years while I've built my own consulting practice. I'm also a certified professional coach. So my work with the firm, while being a part of the executive team and providing counsel to our clients, also focuses on executive counsel and coaching for individuals within our client base, as well as business development. So as per usual for webinars, you all know that there's an option for Q&A or for raising your hand. We certainly invite you to do that throughout our conversation so we can invite you in. If you'd rather just listen, you'll have the deck and the video following this so that you'll be able to kind of go back. We also have a set of a few questions that were offered in advance, so we'll make sure that we address those for those of you that really wanted to let us know ahead of time what was on your mind. All right, so let's get started. Again, this survey, we really wanted to ask in a single question, what's keeping you up at night as advancement professionals? We know we are in this era of unprecedented stress. And so we're moving again from this notion of a sprint where we're reacting to everything to shifting into marathon mode. And so we are really looking at being more intentional and responsive. So as we look at what's foremost in your mind right now, re-envisioning events was top at 31%, followed by annual fund at 26% and contingency planning at 12%, which really makes so much sense because when you think about events, they're the most difficult to replicate in this era of shelter in place and quarantine and social distancing. And so there isn't a really effective immediate pivot for those. And they also represent what we're missing right now, so many of us, the sense of connection and engagement with one another, with the things that matter to us. So much of those opportunities have been limited for us. So again, so understandable and something that we really see is key, that it would be the top thing that's on your mind. So let's talk a little bit about today's three highlights. We want to, again, acknowledge and validate the compounding influences that really are kind of impeding or affecting the ability to sort of say, how do we do this in this new era? Because there are significant stressors, and it's important as a first stage to just acknowledge and validate that the climate, the environment has changed. And so it is not business as usual. The key is, how do we find the opportunities within the challenge so that we can adapt and shift what we do and emerge stronger? Second piece of that is we're going to look at, again, identifying core intentions and outcomes. That's so we understand, what were we trying to do with these events? What was really the core and the essence? And sometimes that's unpacking what the event has become to look at where it started and figure out exactly what are the outcomes and the things that we're expecting, or maybe what we're targeting, and is there an alignment there or not? And then finally, we'll really dive a little deeper, and Dawn will lead you into some options to re-envision gatherings, tapping into her special event expertise and some of the ways that she's been helping clients navigate these new waters on this. So that's how we're going to get started. Let's start with compounding factors. We began with COVID-19. We began with this unexpected, unanticipated event that we just did not have the resources or the history to say, this is how we adapt to this. And even though for those of us in the fundraising community, we may look at things like the 2008 recession, 9/11, this had such varied impact that we really couldn't apply a lot of those lessons learned to this. We needed to think differently. But you add to that then the economic factors that built upon that, the issues of equity that have really elevated to the forefront in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, that are in these instances, they're affecting our institutions, they're affecting us personally, they're affecting our team and our constituency. And so as advancement professionals, you're really now called upon to think about all of these different perceptions, all of these different, again, compounding issues that are affecting not only how you do your work, how your team does the work, and how your constituents and those that you're relying upon to support your institutions are being affected. When we look at the other factors, needing to operate remotely or continuing to be at a distance and limit our access to one another, and how we stay relevant in this environment. Many of you in the survey expressed the fact that, we're not frontline, we're not essential, but we still need to be relevant. And that's so true. And our council continues to go back to stay true to mission. And you'll hear us repeat this time and again. It doesn't serve you well to divert just to think that you might capture a little attention now, because we don't want to lose core constituents. And again, we don't want to veer away from core mission. But we can look at ways that our mission is relevant in this environment. And that's going to be unique for each institution. But those keys are essential. So again, we just want to acknowledge that you're dealing with so many factors on a personal, professional, and institutional level. And these are things that we're, again, really providing counsel and support to our clients to help navigate. And we just want to share a little bit about what we've found in the environment and address some of the things that we know are first and foremost on your minds right now, and on your constituents, on the minds of your constituents and leadership as well. So let's look at these events. And I love Marie Kondo. I love this notion of, does it spark joy? Because quite frankly, what we're finding in this era is that we need to strip away some of the things that have kept us busy, some of the programs that have kind of hung on and clung to our institutions because we've always done them. And we've always been hesitant to say, let's just let that go. Let's sunset it. We always know that there are people that have a particular attachment to them, whether they were the founding people that created the event or the program, or people that really we know rely on those as a part of their engagement and their connected meaning to our institution. Well, this era has certainly given us that blank slate to say, we really need to look at, is this event or this program relevant to what we need to do right now to not only advance our mission, but engage our constituents and serve the clients that we do? And so as we look at that, we're going to look at the resources that are required. And you're going to hear us talk a lot about cost, benefit, and investment, and where we're putting our dollars and our resources. Events in many cases can require a great deal of manpower, a great deal of upfront expense. And in many cases, it's well worth it and has been because of what we get in terms of those outcomes on the other side. But for many institutions, it's continuing to be a struggle to provide those upfront dollars. So when we look at moving to virtual events, we've got the option to maybe say, okay, how do we shift those resources? You know, Dawn, we were talking about this yesterday, and that notion that there are other places that just because we go hybrid, it doesn't mean that there's no cost to it.
Absolutely.
You know, do you want to just talk a few minutes about that? I know we'll dive a little bit deeper, but we were just addressing that it really is reallocating resources.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, as Melpa said in a few slides, we'll get a little deeper into it, but it's, you know, I think the first inclination is to think, oh, it's virtual, so we're really not going to have very many expenses. It's all going to be income, but there are some key areas that you want to think about to make sure they're done properly so that your event goes off without a hitch, and you can really focus on raising money and having a little fun while you're doing it, for sure.
Great. And that is, I mean, that, you know, you talked about having fun and raising funds, and it's true that there are events, but there are so many different things. If we start to peel back why, as an institution, we went in to do some of these events. And as we've talked with clients individually about their events or the sequence of events, we found that some of them have evolved and kind of, again, hung on for reasons that maybe aren't serving the institution as well right now, or they veered away from what their initial intent is. And so one of the things that we really want to encourage is this focus on what's your core intent for the events that you're looking at repurposing or re-envisioning, so that you can then think about what's the best way to re-envision them. Is it an event, or is it maybe a hybrid program, or is it something completely different? So we want to talk a little bit about that. So when we think about events, we kind of think about 4 buckets, 4 ways that events really help us promote our institutions. Their engagement, they help engage volunteers, leadership, constituents, the community in many ways, if it's something that's outward and serving. They build awareness. They help us promote our institution, our mission. Oftentimes, you know, how many of us have had those galas where board members have that table? You want to fill that table. We want to fill it not just with friends, but future friends and those that want to get to know us. So it's a really great opportunity for brand awareness. Recruitment. We're looking at new members, new clients, new families if we're serving in the school environment, or new members if we're in kind of a community building. And of course, fundraising. And oftentimes in this era, that focus of fundraising is first. How are we going to make up for those dollars that come in? And so this is where we start to strip away and say, wait a minute, let's look holistically at what this event really was intended to do. What has it done and evolved in doing? And what can we do as we look at repurposing the event and the intention going forward? So, you know, it's interesting. We are working with a Greek Orthodox metropolis in Chicago, and their parishes, all of the groups that they're doing, a lot of cultural events and festivals, these institutions are relying upon. And so for many of them, it has been stepping back from the funds that come in and looking at, okay, how do we repurpose this and maybe turn this event around to serve the community? And that really came back to focusing on awareness and engagement with the community. So again, this is one of those things where they stepped back and were able to pull back a lot of the resources that went into pre-planning the event and hosting it. So they lowered their capital investment up front to be able to realize maybe some smaller gains from a fund development standpoint or a fundraising standpoint, but really increased their awareness and engagement. So let's look at each of these 4 elements as we do this. So when we talk about the opportunity to divide and deepen, it is to say, 1 event before, 1 gala, 1 golf outing, 1 set of reunions may have done all 4 of these things in the lens. As we're looking in this new era, we may say, wait a minute, how do we look at this and maybe do some smaller events or repurpose things a little differently? So we think about this, and again, Dawn will chime in here as we go, but you know, engagement really is about cultivation and conversation. It's about getting to know those people that are either have been a part of our institution that we really have the chance now to get to know deeper and cultivate, or they're inviting new people in, as in the recruitment. It's really maybe giving them an inside view into the institution. So boy, what does that look like if we can't get inside the institution?
Right.
How are we then kind of giving them that inside show? If it's awareness, is that personal awareness for those participants, that, you know, making them aware of all the good works that we're doing, demonstrating impact, or is it public awareness, as I said, in respect to some of these festivals? And then funds. Definitely we're looking at ways that we're demonstrating impact to invite commitment. Dawn, what's your take a little bit on this notion of how we break down kind of the intention of events? What are you seeing?
Yeah, so, in the beginning, organizations were just canceling a lot of events, right? And then we're moving on to flipping to virtual. And now as states are opening and changing and more opportunities are presenting themselves. Also, I think when we look at this slide, when you look at engagement and recruitment, it gives you a huge opportunity to build your advocate base. It gives you the opportunity to take your volunteers, give them deeper knowledge of your organization, and then send them out to encourage people to go through social media to your now online event. Help them to educate why your mission is important now. Some opportunities have really developed as people maybe have a little more time on their hands and are connecting even more through social media and socially with people, even though it's not in person. It's a way to take that opportunity and use it for your organization, for an event you maybe have changed to be a virtual event coming up, which then in turn provides more awareness about your organization to the community. Right. And hopefully as your event unfolds, also brings in more funds, because now you have a deeper, broader audience that's going to potentially engage with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great points. And it's interesting. One of the questions that came up in the conversation before was really about, as we're opening slowly for some institutions, there's limited opportunity to engage constituents coming in. So it isn't even just about events, but it's about opening and doing some of the things that you would normally do. Thinking about that focus on intention and what the opportunity is, as you say, to engage advocates or to kind of continue the conversation. If we think about restaurants opening slowly, they're modifying menus. So in many cases, we may need to think about how are we modifying our menu of offerings so that we're really focusing on where we get the biggest bang for the buck. And the buck there is really our investment of resources. So that we can think about, again, that return. And that return, what are we looking for, in terms of that return? The other piece is when we talk about kind of this divide and deepen, it's also that notion of, let's think as we separate this out, that we can maybe separate out the components of the event. And we'll talk about this a little bit going forward, of taking one event and segmenting it into multiples, or taking several events and combining them into one online piece. So it's really, again, taking that more holistic approach about not just what do we take for this event and how do we make it as close to what it is as it can be now in this environment, but how do we now take a look at what we're trying to do? So thinking about the cost benefit analysis we talked about, so much of events, are really focused. We've got the venue, we've got the food, we've got the entertainment, we've got all of those things, as well as, that come into the cost of dollars and cents. But it's important, I think, and Dawn, we can talk about this and have talked about this as well, about the investment of time and talent that goes into these events, as they have been traditionally. But then it's also important to look at, how do we shift that lens when we look at the hybrid? What's that opportunity to tap into new talent that maybe is in the digital and virtual world that had not been a part of our events previously, that now they can tap into, let alone where we're breaking down by going virtual, geographic barriers. So suddenly we're able to engage constituents and really pull them in to participate in ways that they couldn't before.
Right.
So, Dawn, I'm curious, what have you found that has been the most sort of intriguing shift when we talk about cost benefit analysis with institutions going from in-person events to any one of these other options?
Yeah, we talk about making sure to make your investments in the right place, but you are saving. You're clearly not spending on food and drink and all the things that you were spending on, probably the biggest part of an event budget.
Right.
So you are saving there, and you can now, I think especially now, really engage your constituency, engage your volunteers, to see what their talents are, and to get them to participate, either through a donation of their time, you know, teaching the organization how to be better at something. So it's definitely a shift. It's definitely a shift as we go to virtual.
Absolutely. Well said, Don. I think the other piece of that, when we look at intention, and pardon my landline going, one of those sidebars of, of being on webinars these days, can't shut that off at the moment. So when we think again about what our intention is going into an event, we can also think about what that return on the investment going in is. And I think it's so important to think about that, especially as we look back at that piece before on, divide and deepen. If it's awareness, what's that return? You mentioned social media and advocacy. So that may be a whole different shift on where we invest in what are our skills and what's our presence on Instagram and social Twitter, Facebook. What are our promotional skills there, and how are we empowering our advocates to push us out to increase awareness? So it's really looking at investment upfront and then return on that investment and how it fits into this sort of, again, holistic view of what we get from events for our institutions. And I think the key here is to pull off of that singular push. And one of the other questions that came up for a number of you in the survey was this notion that needing to educate and kind of assist board and leadership in understanding what this shift is. And this is one of those areas that I think is going to be really critical for you to be able to speak with clarity about here's where we're saving, and we're shifting these resources here. Because as Dawn said, many will say, well, we're going to save all of this money over here because we're not hosting the event. It'll just all be dollars in. And it's so important to make sure that you are able to justify and articulate clearly the value of those other costs that are going to be there. Because for those in leadership and those that may be questioning, saying, hey, we want the biggest bang for the buck on the other side, that investment up front is going to yield multiple fold as we go down the line. And when we think about those engagement strategies, one of the things I'm going to recommend to all of you, if you get the chance, as part of our executive chat series, we spoke with one of our former clients. I had the chance to chat with him. And this was a high school here in Minneapolis that did a collapsing of events. And so they did multiple spring events into a week of giving and kind of one combined hybrid gathering. And it resulted in threefold engagement from what they had done before, as well as exceeding all of their funding goals from all of the events combined. And so it was, again, a way of looking at, they had to invest in some infrastructure pieces, but by doing all of this, they were able to, again, demonstrate this is what we got. We got the return on the investment with increased dollars, increased engagement, and increased social awareness in the community. So, which now is resulting in increases in recruitment.
Yeah.
So Dawn, why don't you walk through some of the keys for looking at first the virtual gala? Because we know the first piece is, this is the top one. So let's start there.
Absolutely. So most of you have either a gala planned or one that's going to be planned in the not too distant future. That is probably a significant source of revenue. And you are probably wondering how to make that happen. So we're definitely seeing that the move to virtual and hybrid events is working for the people who are investing and making the right decisions. they're expanding, like Melpa was saying. You know, there's a client we were talking with who normally they have 400 or so people at their gala. They moved to an online event and were able to engage and have 1,500 people engaged in that night. So, you know, they increased their engagement by 1,000 people.
Mm-hmm.
They could never have done that in a sit down, come to the space gala. And so, you know, that will then bring in dollars. They just about broke even to where they were last year, which was amazing. They didn't think they would be able to do that, but that engagement now is exponential going forward. But you really, when you think about a gala and now it's going to be online, probably the most important investment you can make is in AV. I think that most of us think, oh, it's Zoom or Facebook Live, and I know how to do that, and I will do that, and we'll save money. But it's really important to evaluate what talent you have on your staff to do that, and if you have that, that's awesome. What talent is in your network of vendors? If you have an AV team that you work with, will they work with you to give you a discount this year if you're continuing your contract next year when you go back to a potentially live gala? How about of your constituent base or your volunteers? Are there people who have those skills? So you want to evaluate all of that after you look at your budget, but you don't want to skimp, I think, on the AV piece. You want to really think through that, since that is that's the venue, that's your venue basically. And so you want to make sure you have consistency. If you have an MC, if you have an auctioneer, you want to make sure their backgrounds are consistent if they're not together with you in one spot where you're broadcasting from. It's just things you want it to be professional looking. Even though it's virtual, even though people understand that, it's everybody's probably not all in one space. And then also thinking through who's speaking. If you want to pre-record those conversations, all of us have been on Zoom. Sometimes you can see who else is on Zoom. Sometimes you can't. To go live, some people are really good speaking in front of a live audience, but maybe not so good to a computer screen. So you can control those environments if you pre-record, but play it as if it's happening that night. You're not trying to be deceptive in any way, but you can have a live MC introducing the videos. And then that's where you want to make sure you have the investment in the AV so that all runs smoothly. Some of the other things that you might consider investing in, we've been hearing a lot about people starting to move to a hybrid virtual gala where maybe their board member is hosting a group of people they would have had at their table. And so maybe you want to send a couple bottles of wine, to anybody who's having a preview party at their home, getting groups of people together. So it's still a little bit personal, but you're still having your virtual event. And then, we talk about All-Star Access. What we're hearing is that celebrities and high profile individuals are home too right now. So, if you have a local personality, TV personality, if you have a celebrity who's really known in your cause, if there's, a local politician that has always supported your cause, or, I know politics is maybe not the best thing right now, but if you have someone you trust who can elevate your event that you can use as a marketing tool to have people engaged that night, then it makes sense to try to reach out, even if there's, if you're from a school, if you have an alum, or someone in your network that is famous, that could even do a little pre-recording. They don't even have to be there live, but you can say, again, as a teaser, this person will be there, will be with us, join us during the event. So it's a way to bring some excitement to the event that night. And then sponsorships, what we have found is most sponsors are staying on for virtual events. And they understand that, or they're, it's shared that their reach will be much bigger than it was in an in-person event. And it's really important to maybe not just send out that sponsorship package this year, but to pick up the phone and have an in-person conversation and really explain where you are in your organization, what's happening, how you've been affected by the pandemic, really what a difference their support will make in this year's event and why it's so critically important. So we're finding with our clients that that is working and that people are still supporting the events for sure.
Absolutely. Great points, Dawn. A couple of things to dovetail off what you said, which I think is terrific. Talking about that event where, again, engagement increased threefold. And even if dollars didn't quite get there, this is one of those places where, again, you're making that investment because now you have the opportunity to cultivate relationship and gain new donors, new prospects, new clientele through that awareness. And so this is, again, a year that's going to look different for our institutions. And so we want to make sure that we are calculating the return on investment in terms of things beyond just dollars and cents, which again, maybe what our board leadership is looking for, maybe what our leaders are looking for, but we need to make sure that we are framing it again as the bigger picture, because that increase, that 3-4-fold increase in connection and engagement is going to yield down the line. But the key then is to make sure that you've got in place some follow-up strategies to that. The other piece, where we talked about brand awareness is, you were mentioning backgrounds. And I think one of the things that's so important for institutions when we host galas, oftentimes, in many cases, we're at the venue or we have certain things that represent the venue. So thinking about ways that you can maybe use some B-roll footage or use some background materials that can reflect the institution and things that are really so viscerally connect people to that institution, whether they are people, whether they are, parts of the facility or, doing a little virtual tour, or whether they're individuals that have been a part of the community. Thinking about ways that, again, make sure that it's not just another Zoom or another event that's kind of neutral, but you've got this opportunity to brand it for your institution, even across the scroll. So we've got our logo here for our screen. What do you have scrolling across that's branding your event?
Yes,
and also, sponsors can help you with.
Yes, and also, advertising our sponsors. And Melpo and I were chatting yesterday. We had a client who was asking our opinion about a Zoom screen versus a real backdrop. And, the conversation went to the Zoom screen can get distorted. It can, look like a Zoom screen. So if you have the opportunity to create a good backdrop, a nice step and repeat, you can put sponsors on there, put your logo, have that behind anyone who's speaking. It keeps the event consistent, it keeps the branding consistent, and it makes it much more professional. So something to think about as you work through your virtual event.
Absolutely. In previous webinars, we've talked kind of about the cacophony of emails and information that's coming out. There's now the cacophony of Zoom events. And so really needing to find those ways to distinguish yours so that they, again, identify it with your institution, identify it with things that are beloved and highly recognized, as well as then promoting those that are supporting you.
Absolutely.
Terrific.
Absolutely.
So let's talk specifically about digital engagement, Dawn.
Yeah. So, when you think about auctions and raffles, we'll start there. What I've seen is people's first instinct is to say we should really cut them back and not have as many. And what we would encourage you to think about is people come, so typically people are not charging for an event. If they are charging for a virtual event, it's a much reduced cost. And so your supporters come to your event, they pay a ticket price normally, and then they come with a budget that they are going to spend that night really to donate to your organization through your raffle, through your fund to need, through your auctions, live auctions, silent auctions. So when I've talked to clients, their first instinct is to say, we're just going to have like 10 or 15 silent auction items this year. And really it's the opposite of how you should be thinking. You want to think about giving your supporters and people who are attending as many opportunities to spend the money that they have budgeted to support your organization as possible. So have a number of auctions. Now, I know auctions can be more challenging because obviously the best sellers in auctions are always trips, you know, and sporting events. So maybe you want to do some packages. Maybe you want to talk to those organizations about giving extended dates so that people can go through 21. If you have people who are donating tickets, maybe you can get tickets for the 21 season, that kind of thing. But don't limit your auctions. The other really important point to think about as you go online onto a virtual event, if you do raffles, make sure you check with your state rules on online raffles. They can be different than in-person raffles. Some states don't allow them. So you can potentially have them as a special item just during the time of the event. And that way it gets people to participate and not just in the online auction that maybe you've sent out a week ahead. You know, and again, or you can potentially rename it to be something that's not a raffle and do it in a different way. Timing is so important. So, you know, when someone's thinking about a virtual gala, I think the first instinct is to think, oh, it's going to be as long as an in-person gala. So it seems like the sweet spot time is about 45 minutes to an hour is the most successful galas have been that time frame. What I would encourage you to do, my suggestion would be to actually put the time, the ending time on your invitation. Normally, we don't really usually put an ending time on an invitation, but you want to put the start time and the ending time so people know it's brief and that they won't be, you know, staying on for a long time. And then, you know, partners, you want to think about potential entertainment. Can you get a children's choir? Can you utilize your constituent base? You know, mobile bidding platforms, so important. We talked about AV, but the other most important part of your event is going to be your online options of donation and bidding for your auction. So you want to make sure you have a really good partner that has a user-friendly platform, a visually appealing platform, and let that be one of your good investments that you make for sure. And show off your sponsors. You know, Melba was talking about, you know, our design at the bottom. Make sure you're either doing slides, you're scrolling on the bottom, use your bottom third of your screen and highlight those sponsors and thank them. Super, super important.
Absolutely. You know, a couple of things that occur to me here, Don, when we talk about auctions too, it's also making sure that we maybe expand the time for people to be able to get access to looking at what the items are. Maybe there are a few that are held that are only promoted during the event. So you're building a little urgency. It's that same sense, you know, it's interesting. We talk about ways to kind of move things forward and building an urgency, building a momentum also as a part of containing that event, because there's that sense that we're all going to be on it together. Not we're meandering in and out, but there's this kind of contained time, shared experience, and there's an urgency to that. That can really be shared in terms of ways to accelerate your growth. The other piece relative to auctions to think about is that you may have donors who in the past provided monetary sponsorships or made significant gifts, and they may not be in a position right now to make a cash gift, but they may in fact have something that's an ideal auction item. And so this is an important time to not limit the way or who and how you're thinking about filling that deck of auction items. Because again, it may be that somebody's sitting a little bit cash strapped and says, I can't do this, but I can do that. And relative to trips, one of the things right now that may be more appealing is when people are sharing condos, second homes, timeshares, where people are maybe looking at maximizing the value of that investment. It also then minimizes exposure for those that might buy into the trip. So lots of things, you know, here in Minnesota, one of the things that's really popular are cabins that, you know, you can get for, you know, as Dawn said, maybe extending that period of time, but that's a drivable thing. That's a contained thing for a family or a group. So again, as you look at it, don't just think about what's already in your deck. Look at okay, who fits what the current climate is, and
Yeah.
how might it serve my client, my prospect, my donor, my friend within the institution to maybe be able to shift how they've supported us
Yeah.
to something different. So, and that can really
Absolutely.
just boost the appeal of your auction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, and think about too, most of the time the auction is started maybe 2 or 3 days before the event.
Mhm.
It might make sense to open it a week before.
Mhm.
And then if you're going to have specific items for that night, you can tease them out ahead of time and make it very clear they're going to be available just during that 1 hour window.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the hybrid evolution of
Yeah.
events and pieces here.
Yeah. We talked a little bit when we started about how, in the beginning we were halting. Everybody just didn't really know what to do and was canceling. And then we moved to virtual. Let's try it. Let's try it online. Let's see what happens. At least we can capture part of our income. But now as the country is slowly starting to open, we're starting to see more of a hybrid, which this will evolve, I think, as we get through and past, hopefully, this pandemic. But currently what we're starting to see is micro parties, viewing parties, if you want to call them, just small groups of people getting together in private homes and accessing the event virtually. So you have, you still have that personal touch, maybe from a board member or from a really positive volunteer who loves your organization and wants to get their friends together, a group of people who just love the event and want to still participate and share it. So, and that can happen anywhere in the country. That doesn't only have to happen within your geographic area. And so it's, think big, think how you can encourage people to participate, in unique ways based on, again, all across the country, we see different levels of opening. So if you have constituents and potential attendees who can do something, it makes sense to do it. And then think about how you can engage those people that night. Have a development director call, have the chairman call the host and, thank them. Maybe have wine sent or balloon sent or something that evening for them to share with their guests. But there's really great opportunities to break those geographic barriers, include a lot of people, make it fun, and break into this new kind of hybrid model. And I think going forward, people are seeing that virtual has been such a success that even when we do go back to actual live galas, full-blown galas, that a lot of people are talking about they're going to continue this streaming part, this live event part, still being able to include people who are not local and really capture that new, larger base that you've gathered in this unique environment.
Absolutely, John. A couple of things I want to talk about too with these virtual viewing events. It may in fact be, as you said, that there are people that are in a place where they can gather in a home or gather in a yard and be a part of what's going on. But there may also be people that are creating virtual viewing groups that still aren't ready to be part of that, but they can create that kind of virtual community. That's a real opportunity, whether it's local or outside, because I think, again, we're going to look at how this is going to evolve. And this is a place where I would really make a recommendation that you begin to think about how you are surveying and talking to your leadership and constituents. We have found such tremendous success with our clients through this time to make sure that they're tapping into and talking with their constituents and leaders to get the kind of feedback. We don't want to, as we've said before, you've heard this, don't assume or don't presume. And it's something that can happen. You can do it internally, use a survey monkey and get something out. We have found that oftentimes we're feeling like we may be starting to open up and we're just not seeing the response, and we're thinking, gosh, have we lost constituents? Well, we find that clients are now realizing when they survey, significant majority of their constituents are saying we're not ready to come back out yet. So it isn't a reflection on their connection to your institution. It's rather where they are in the process of, responding and coming out of COVID. So I think that's something so important, because it's easy for us to take it personally and go, oh, nobody's coming, we're opening our doors. We just may not realize that our constituents aren't ready in the way that we may be able to open or expand an event. So we want to look at how then can we meet them where they are. And events are a perfect way, and this hybrid solution is a great way. Because the other thing, I'm thinking about this, John, as we talked about limiting the virtual component of an event to an hour, there may be people that you may know, again, in small communities, oftentimes we're committed to multiple events, and spring season, gala season can get exhausting. And it may be that we're picking and choosing where we're going to the actual event, but we still want to be engaged in all of these others. So rather than having to say no to multiple events, we find ways that we can engage. So again, there are things that are opening, I think doors that are opening for us in this. But what's so important, and we'll kind of tap into this in this next slide, is to think beyond what you've done. So let's kind of tap into that. Well, actually, one slide more. We'll go here, and then we'll go to that. But I think it's looking at a couple of the models that we can kind of pull from the original Gala piece. So absolutely. You want to get started, Dawn, and then I'll chime in.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things to think about, because it may not be smaller with how many people are engaged, but it is not a big 400 or 500 person event in a hall. As we talk about these virtual micro parties that can happen around a gala, if you think about a board member or a key donor inviting a table to your gala, and they're sitting at the gala with the music playing and they can't really talk. And, now this is a really different opportunity, a really unique opportunity. If they were to invite them to their home, or they were gathering in their backyard, or they're gathering in a small Zoom room as part of your gala, they can now have a conversation, an educational conversation with these donors. They can really help them understand why your organization is important, why their support would be important. All the things you would have loved to have happen at the actual gala, but now is a more intimate way to do it. So that's a great opportunity to take, and to, not just think about in the gala, but to think about in all different aspects of different events that you're doing, how you can take these now more personal, smaller offshoots of your event, and how to really make them as productive as possible.
So I think it's important when we do this, Dawn, you're spot on, because this notion of increased intimacy can really be one of the benefits, one of the silver linings that we're gaining from moving beyond the traditional gala or the traditional large scale event, is that we think about people are either getting to know other people, we're either cultivating relationships or cultivating relationship with the institution. And when we look at breaking down to increase intimacy, there's a couple of things. If it's about the organization, this behind your small group visits. So if we are starting to open a little bit, do we have the capacity to maybe do some small on-site visits? Even outside, we're in the summer months, fall months, we've got more opportunity now as we're starting to open to take the benefit of space. But we can think about, again, what is the intimacy when we get a small group gathered that maybe have a shared common theme interest or common connection. Maybe it's that individual who's saying, I'm bringing my table of 10 to visit, and they're going to get a personal tour by your executive director or leader, or they're going to meet somebody else. It's a different way that they get to experience the institution than they might have before. These are labor intensive in a different way, but again, can be exceptionally impactful. And they really engage your volunteers and your leadership in a different way. If it's outside impact, one of the things to think about is pop-up events. So something that happened here in the state of Minnesota recently really reminded me of a very early Lemons into Lemonade activity that I had early in my career. So with the Minnesota State Fair being closed and not happening this year, all of the vendors, food vendors, have started to pop up in parking lots at certain vendors or certain locales. And they're now going to be doing parades through communities so that they can, because many of these small businesses relied on the state fair as a huge revenue generator. So they're now going through different pockets of communities and doing a parade so that people can experience and support their institutions. So when I started in university work, one of the things that we did was pre-homecoming, it was a tailgate as people were building their floats and developing their things. And we had on-site, one location. Everybody would come and gather during the parts of the week when they were working on their floats. Well, for whatever reason, we had restriction and we couldn't gather. And we thought, oh no, how are we going to, it was a great way. I worked in the alumni office. It was a student engagement effort. So what we ended up doing was saying, well, wait a minute, let's take it on the road. Same thing as the parade. So it became a traveling tailgate. And we took the food, the alumni connections, all of the activities that we were doing, and went from sorority house, fraternity house, community organization, athletic grouping, and we went and met them where they were. And it became a much more intimate way for us to connect and have conversations where if everybody was there all at once, there might be a limited group that had access to the alumni network that we had. They might have stayed connected to their own in conversation. We then got to step out of where we were and get to know them where they were. And so it became the new tradition. So it was one of those things where what had been got just thrown off for one reason or another. And we could have gone back the next year, but we changed it because it allowed us to increase intimacy. It allowed us to get to know the people in the organizations better. So again, there are ways that this can really help you emerge stronger. So think about that and look at what's happening in your communities with other institutions and how they're adapting. So you might find new ways to innovate.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk about this notion of we've never done it like this before. I think, that is something that we've heard, personally, professionally, institutionally. But we certainly want to talk about this has thrown, COVID has thrown all of these things. We can't do it the way we had. And in many cases, that is a blank slate. And that's a real opportunity to move past things that may have not been working as effectively. Dawn, you want to talk about this a little bit? I certainly can say that for the one event, that we talked about on this executive chat, their gala had been something that we had said over the years was really ready to sunset. It had waned, kind of ebbed and flowed and waned and took a lot of effort. And this has rejuvenated it in a way, but changed it. And so again, this is the opportune time to rethink how you do what you've always done.
Yes. And I think even if your event was not ready to sunset, even if you had a thriving event, typically event managers, I was one, so I can say this, you know what works and you want to keep doing what's working. And, one of the blessings maybe of COVID and the pandemic and all the changes that we're facing is it's giving us the opportunity to, like Malpa was saying, really look at it differently. Look at, what's working. That's great. How can we improve upon it? But now we have this opportunity to do a whole slew of new things that will really allow us to grow as an organization. And so just really consider there's lots of ideas online. There's lots of blogs. There's all kinds of different things that are giving great ideas of how to adapt and how to change, because every event is a little bit different. We've talked a lot about galas today. People are doing interesting things with golf outings, where, some states you're not really allowed to do that yet, or the dinner, which is usually the biggest money-making part of it after golf, is restricted. So there's some interesting things that people are doing. And most importantly, as you think about how to change and make things different, you just want to keep focused on mission. Nelpo really started with that today. It's so important to stay true to your mission, to really focus on how you can communicate your mission, and just make the best of that. There are lots of opportunities to take your events and be successful with them, even though you can't do them in person right now. So adapting and really taking advantage of what's going on.
Absolutely, John. And we're going to go into the final piece of communication, but I just want to hit on mission here for a moment, because one of the statistics that came out of this year's Giving USA results was that retention rates for institutions still hover below 50%. And when we think about people who have already demonstrated an interest in your institution, they've already bought into your mission, what are we doing to maintain and engage and continue to kind of keep sustaining their support? That's where we don't want to lose mission. Sometimes what happens is we lose that support because we start to divert from mission. And so what brought somebody to the institution initially now doesn't resonate as strongly. And so that notion of when you look at the cost benefit analysis, we go back to investment, it takes far less to hold on and retain a donor than it does to capture and connect and cultivate a new one. So this is a place where think about where you're putting your investment of your time, your energy, your connection to your advocates. Hold on, donor retention is a key, and it's such low-hanging fruit right now that I think many of us don't realize, because we're always looking at that growth, which is great. But again, this is a place where connection to mission and kind of alignment really to your core values is so important to maintaining that connection with your donors.
And I also think one of the things we've really seen is, I think this situation that we've been in has really given people time to think about what's important. They're focusing on the organizations that are important to them. So you really want to get to your core, keep them engaged, and find out where they are in their giving. But don't be afraid to engage people. We're finding people are very ready and willing to talk and be engaged in philanthropy, and don't assume that they're not. So it's definitely an opportunity to stay engaged with your constituency group.
Terrific. Great segue, Dawn, into communications, which is the last piece. If you're going to flip the script, if you're going to change what you've done before, you've got to make sure that you're communicating why, what the impact is, what the value is, how it's going to affect them and their engagement. And you want to begin with your internal team. Make sure everybody on your team, your core advocates, those who are working with and for you and on your behalf, know the plan and know why, and empower them with the tools that they need to be able to articulate it, and really encourage them to go out and promote that and amplify the impact. This is, again, ways that we can build momentum, because we can leverage things like social media and our networks. And people are looking, as Dawn said, many people do have a little more time or are taking some of this time at home to reach out and connect with people. And so one of the calls I had gotten, it was just so fascinating, from a nonprofit I'm associated with here in Minnesota, was from an alum in Michigan. But again, we can have this what might seem disparate or disconnected engagement happening now, because it's all about different outreach. Absolutely. So make sure that you are, again, empowering everybody, and don't let your board off the hook. And because many of them are waiting and they just don't know how, and they don't know how to adapt their role. So ensure that you are giving them the tools that they need and inviting them, to be a part of it, and showing them how, and rally the resources you have. There are so many people that, again, as Dawn said, are waiting in the wings. And I think we've all been a little hesitant to say, gosh, there's so much going on. Do we really need to ask on behalf of our institution? But what we have found, especially with studies that we've done, asking about the impact on COVID and philanthropy, people are saying, I'm really continuing to support those institutions that have been true to our heart. And so even if they're not embracing new giving, they're sustaining their giving. So again, make sure that you are not denying them the opportunity to do so, and that you're keeping that dialogue open. So communicate what and how you're changing and adapting, and make sure that that communication comes with the extension of invitation to engage.
And also, we've talked before, Melpo, about this idea of a joyful advocate. And, you have people who love your organization. Take advantage of them. Don't be afraid to ask them to participate in your events, to reach out to others, grow your network through their network, and take advantage of those people who are happy to spread the word about your organization and why they love it.
Fantastic. Great way to end. We want to thank you all for joining us. As before, we'll have the deck and video available for you. You'll be receiving that from us in another day or two. And we encourage you to join us for the next 2 webinars, which will talk about annual fund and contingency planning, each consecutive Thursday at 1 o'clock Eastern. Again, take care. Thank you, Don. We wish you all well.
Thank you, everyone.